Let's start with you, Mr. Dark. From the beginning here, how did the relationship between France and its former colony, Mali, get so bad? Is it just down to France not supporting the military junta that took over power there, or is there more?
Well, I think the lack of France's support for the junta, that's part of it. But I think that there are two other factors that are in play. One is that you have a past with France and Mali. There has been increasing sentiment against France, and a lot of that's based in France's colonial past with Mali, how they have regarded the will of the Malian people in the decisions they've made, whether or not they really considered it. So that's existed since Mali reclaimed its independence, and so that's one of the factors. But also another factor is Russia, which seems to be a factor everywhere in the world. They have taken advantage of this sentiment and used it to, spread disinformation or to amplify those perceptions about what France was trying to do or what France wasn't doing correctly in Mali. So I think when you combine that with France's lack of support for the current military leaders, you have a situation where the outcome we saw this week is totally expected.
Mr. Ejime, can you hear us? Okay, let's see if we can continue with Mr. Dark now. The impression we get is that France's presence in the Sahel region for the past 9 years or so has not, really helped to curb or contain the Islamist militant insurgency in that region. How factual is that? But before you respond to that, let's see if we have Mr. Ejime back. Mr. Ejime, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I'd like to respond to the first question that I put to Mr. Dark about the relationship with France and its former colony, how it got so bad. Does it have to do with just the military withdrawal?
No, I think there is background to it. One is that even in France, there has been some uncomfortable expression of the fact that some people do not want, it's no longer popular, this idea of having French troops abroad. That is one. And two, even in Africa, you have seen some anti-French sentiments growing among the population. It appeared that the leaders were the ones that took the countries to this unholy relationship of having French troops in former African colonies. And they have become now, some questions are being raised about it. What are they really doing? In the case of Mali, Mali was itself that it was Mali that asked for, invited the French in after the 2013 problem. In the north, the Tuaregs, those who are seeking independence from Mali itself, but the Islamic armed group seized on that, and that was how Mali approached France to come in. But okay, you will now see, after 9 years, you will say, what has been achieved? Nothing has happened to the insecurity that is there, both in Mali and then the Sahel. You will say, well, initially there was some, you had some successes, but that I think fatigue has set in. And then people are now questioning whether the troops there, whether they have not outlived their welcome.
All right, just before you joined us, I actually put that question to Mr. Dark about the 9 years that they've spent in the region. It doesn't seem to have helped to curb the insurgency there. Mr. Dark, I'd like you to take that on. How factual is the position that the 9 years that they spent there didn't really do much?
Well, I think that that's a very justifiable argument. I think that regardless of the amount of success or lack thereof that you think happened in Mali, there has been a lack of a plan, a strategic vision, or at least that hasn't been articulated to Mali and the rest of the world. Also, we've seen this happen all over the globe, in Afghanistan, is another example. When people don't understand the assignment, things can go on forever. And especially in this new age when we're fighting terrorism, which is different than the fights that countries have had in the last 2 centuries, where you're fighting disparate groups. You're not fighting like an official government per se. It's very hard to set up milestones and goals for when you would leave, for example, in the case of France and Afghanistan. And I don't think that the French-led effort, really factored in how different of a battle this was going to be and what would be the milestone before they withdrew. Because if the milestone is simply when things are safe and stable again, then that's never ending, because there's always going to be some type of terrorist threat. And I don't think this was completely thought through or given the resources needed to make this a success from the beginning.
All right, Mr. Ejime, let's look at insurgency across the board. The Sahel region, we know, goes beyond Mali. It cuts across Niger, Chad, Burkina Faso, and even Mauritania. So will the pullout of the French troops from Mali have any form of ripple effect against the fight against insurgency in the Sahel region?
There's a possibility that the insurgents or Islamic Al-Qaeda and all these other armed groups might take advantage of that to maybe ratchet up their attacks. But they're already carrying out attacks from Mali. They go to Burkina Faso, to Niger, and all that. And you can see what is happening there. The governments there are being rattled. The coup in Burkina Faso was because the government there did not address the issue of insurgency or terrorism. So there is a likelihood that that will happen. But also, Macky, they have the Sahel of 5 countries, that are trying to, by themselves, the African countries that are there, trying to fight these insurgents. The problem is that perhaps they lack the capacity or they don't have the resources. But if they put their act together, I think they can do it, because foreign troops or foreigners, foreign powers cannot claim to love Africa more than Africans themselves. So I think it is time for Africa. What has happened in Mali now, what is happening, will make Africa now perhaps looking west. So, after 60 years of independence, you don't have to rely on foreign forces to protect your territory. Where is the independence if other people are, for instance, in the case of France, they are not only in charge of defense, they are in charge of the economy. Most of the 14 countries running the CFA francs currency that are controlled by the French treasury. And then, so when somebody controls your economy and your defense, I think what they have is flag independence. I think Africa has to look in west and then take care of its own, reassert itself as an independent, some of these independent countries, and not just be there on paper.
Mr. Dak, I'd like your reaction to that. What would be the effect on the fight against insurgency? Do you agree with Mr. Ejime that it's time we begin to look inwards instead of looking for others to fight for us?
I definitely think that should be the goal. Because we want, all countries, especially when they're fighting insurgents in this case, be it in Africa or anywhere else in the world, to be self-sufficient. Now, here comes the problem with reaching that reality. We have to make sure that the Malian forces have what they need, resources-wise, intelligence-wise. And I think that in that case, they need and should depend on the help of Western powers. But they also have to establish the right boundaries and limitations with these Western powers, so that they make sure that all the people, everybody involved knows that the goal is for these countries to be independent and defend their own territories on their own strength and in their own steam.
All right, Mr. Ejime, let me get back to you. The military authorities in Mali have reacted to France's plan for a gradual pullout by demanding that the French troops leave without delay. What, in your thinking, is the endgame of Colonel Assimi Goïta-led military government? Is this just political grandstanding, or is there more to it than what we see on the surface?
Well, is that for me or for...
for you, Mr. Ejime, for you.
Okay. Yeah, I think you mentioned it is, much about grandstanding. and perhaps saying that, telling France that Mali is a sovereign nation, that they can, before they came in, there was an agreement. And they are right that now is a unilateral decision that France has taken to pull out. And they are saying, no, don't wait for 4 months or 6 months, come and go, just leave immediately. I think but beyond all that, when reality sets in, I think they shouldn't overreach themselves in just sacking everybody. There has to be some strategy to it. They have to be structured in their response, not being precipitate or just acting on emotion. Because I tell you, security is not something that you will joke with. So this tit for tat, I don't know for how long it's going to go, but I think there should be some mediation. So people will come around and then let them reach some agreement about how the things can before things get worse. I think they should, because Mali, let's face it, they are not in a position really to control all its territories. As we speak, northern Mali is not accessible to the government in Bamako. But France, that has troops there, can control, and that is where you have the minerals. So there is some economic, equation to it. But how far can Mali go with the limited resources is another thing. But I can tell you that something is unfolding, unraveling about the power and the influence that France has over its former colonies. I think some people might want to draw a lesson from here and then say, well, listen, after 60 years of independence, you cannot still be holding on to this umbilical cord of allowing France exploit the resources of Africa, and then in the name of helping them, but actually they are helping themselves. So
I want to interject quickly from something you said, and just because we're time constrained, Mr. Doc, I'd like to ask you. Mr. Ejime inferred it in his comments. France, with all its might, couldn't really seem to have achieved a lot for the people of Mali. What are the chances that Mali and the military on their own will do better where the French failed?
Well, I think it's possible now. You have two factors that I like to consider for that question. One is that definitely the Malian forces will need support, military support, intelligence support, strategic support, and they will need legitimacy in the international community to be trusted, that they are really reflecting the democratic will of the people. But it's possible because while France couldn't do it, it's not clear that France did all that they could have done to stop it, with the number of troops, with a good strategy, with a good end goal. So I don't think the Malians should be discouraged that they wouldn't be able to if France couldn't, because it's not clear that France put all that it could have in the beginning to end this, or to at least reach their goal and be able to get out, not this way, being asked to leave, but getting out once they've reached a milestone or a goal.
I will have to leave it there for now. I know this conversation will continue in the coming days. But for now, thank you very much, Mr. Kevin Doc and Mr. Paul Ejime. Thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.